Aloha, I'm Roger Jelinek, Executive Director of the festival, and I'd like to welcome you to this session and to assure you that if you would like to see it again, or if you have friends who missed it because they're doing something else, it will be available on YouTube. It'll go out simultaneously on YouTube and Facebook. And it's available on our YouTube channel on the Better Tomorrow Speaker Series website. And then there will be an edited version edited for highlights that will go up on our website and will be there for probably a year. So there are many opportunities for you to, you and your friends and your mother and father and your children to see this. And without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Anita, and thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Roger, and thank you for organizing this. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Anita Hofschneider, and I'm a reporter at Honolulu Civil Beat. Honolulu Civil Beat is a nonprofit news organization supported by our readers, and you can find us at civilbeat.org. At Civil Beat, I cover a wide variety of topics. We call my beat social issues because it's so broad. I write about things like housing, disparities, racial and gender disparities. And most recently, I'm also covering the healthcare beat, which is a big deal during this pandemic. So today we're going to be talking about the pandemic and how it's exacerbated existing gender disparities here in Hawaii. We have an all-star panel here today featuring Denise Konan, Kealoha Fox, and Nanci Kreidman. I'm going to go ahead and let each of them introduce themselves. So Denise, will you please start us off?
Thank you, Anita. Yes, aloha. I'm Denise Konan. I'm the Dean of the College of Social Sciences at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And my college is a big one, a dynamic one. We're one of the largest in terms of student numbers. And this past year, our faculty have really been focusing on sort of rapid response with COVID-19 in terms of the research we've been doing. Some of you may follow UHERA, which is the UH Economic Research Organization, and they've been putting out a lot of important information for the community. But we've also have faculty from sociology, psychology, ethnic studies, women and gender and sexuality studies, and many more who have been doing really important work on the society here in Hawaii.
Great, thank you. Kealoha, will you introduce yourself, please?
Absolutely, thanks so much, Anita. Aloha, velina mai me Kealoha kako. My name is Kealoha Fox. I am most importantly in all spaces. I'm a mom. And I'm also a scientist, practitioner, and I am the senior manager of social health integration at Aloha Care. And we're a safety net health plan who provides a number of important services for our Medicaid and Medicare lines of business across Hawaii, serving nearly 80,000 members. And that's an area that I wanted to talk about today, and the growing enrollment of Medicaid recipients through COVID-19 and how that illustrates a certain set of ongoing disparities and gaps that we need to look at really systemically. And so in my programs, I focus on our social determinants of health transformation plan, our value-added services, and looking at culturally responsive services that are unique to Hawaii, that resonate with our local culture, and that are a part of the genealogies and ways, especially that Native Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders have been raised and are intimately and spiritually connected to overall health and well-being and longevity of life. So I'm just really happy to be here with you all, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion with all three of you folks who I just admire and appreciate your work so much right now.
Thank you. We're so happy to have you too. Nanci?
Thank you. It's nice to be among such an esteemed group. I work with the Domestic Violence Action Center. I am one of two co-founders. We're celebrating our 30th anniversary this year. It's a big milestone for the community. We could not have achieved what we have without the inspired support of the community. We started with 2 part-time staff, and there are now 50 of us working to bring responsive, culturally reasonable, specialized program services to our diverse community, legal services, 24-hour, 7-day-a-week text, chat, and helpline support, on-site court services for every person who is seeking to obtain a restraining order, legal representation in paternity, divorce, and restraining order matters, support groups, long-term advocacy, assisting survivors navigate their way from danger to safety, and housing, which is our most recent addition to the array of program services. For survivors, that is a key variable in their escape to safety. If there's no place to go, their options are something like the car, couch surfing, or back to an abusive environment. We do a lot of outreach and education on a campaign to deepen the community's understanding about the complex and costly problem of domestic violence. We're very, very happy to be here in service to the community. We are working very hard. It's been a challenging year. And I'm very gratified by the privilege I've been bestowed to be a voice for survivors and others who work in the field with me, right beside me. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Now, Denise, one thing that you didn't mention is that you're an economist by training, I think.
Yes, that's right.
And so, one big aspect of this pandemic has been the economic impact, especially here in Hawaii, where we had the worst unemployment rate last year in the nation. And still, I believe last I checked, have a higher unemployment rate than the national average. So I was wondering if you could start us off by first talking about what are the ways that women in Hawaii have economically been impacted by the pandemic?
Okay, well, when I was thinking about this topic, and I am an economist. I'm also a woman economist, and that's a minority, right? There's not as many of us. I was thinking back to March 2020, February, March 2020. And at that time, our unemployment rates were amongst the lowest in the nation. I don't know if you can remember way back, but, and at that time, women and men were pretty much on par in terms of unemployment. And then when the pandemic hit by April, unemployment for women had jumped to over 16%, and unemployment for men was about 13%. Just a quick and rapid change in unemployment rates. And of course, things got very, very difficult indeed. And interestingly, women are in those kind of service professions that were on the front line in many ways. In many ways, they were vulnerable to interactions that could result in COVID, but they were also in the kind of positions that when we went into a shutdown period, they were very much impacted. And many women then were in jobs that it was not easy to work from home. That wasn't the type of work. But as the pandemic wore on and there were changes that happened, the difference between men and women was also, the impacts were also quite different. We started noticing things like, these supply chain challenges and real differences in jobs. And so, it became pretty hard for men and women. But when you start to look at, the numbers now in terms of women and men, and I just have a quick slide if I can share the screen on this. When you look at the numbers, let me just share this quickly. Unemployment rates now, so around August 2021, and you compare men and women, it looks like women actually have a lower unemployment rate than men. This is for the national average, but this also reflects pretty well Hawaii's situation as well. So 5% adult male unemployment and 4.8% for women. But the story that's not told here is the dramatic impact that it has had, the pandemic has had on women participating in the labor force, women who are choosing to remain in the labor force. What we've seen is really an exit of women. So I think pressure to be caregivers, pressure to step in when when the children are not able to go to school, and the difficulty with re-entering into those jobs that just aren't as available anymore, really left a huge drop in women participation, and that is quite a new phenomena. That really has been a change.
Thank you, Denise. And as we know, not all women have been affected equally. There are also a lot of racial and ethnic disparities nationally as well as locally. And so, Kealoha, I was wondering if you could kind of give us a bit of an overview about what that's looked like and how gender inequity in the pandemic has intersected with the racial disparities as well.
Absolutely. So, I really appreciate Denise's expertise and where she's coming from, because now we know there's been enough research and there's been enough publications where we've been able to really study the first full years of the pandemic and look beyond, obviously, the health related issues and the stressors and losses. But now we've been able to look across sectors and really think about this from a much more systemic perspective. And so to be able to bridge from Denise's expertise and mine, I quote the World Economic Forum saying that 54 million women around the world were knocked out of work, and that this has been published over and over and over again by reputable researchers and entities that are showing us that there's been this widening of gender gaps that include gender pay gaps, right? And that is definitely a core at the nexus in my work in a safety net organization, and where the safety net has been, one, a critical pathway for people to continue to stay well, to live, to make it through this pandemic. But I think it really does highlight the exacerbation of conditions that we've known for a really long time. And so I was lucky earlier in my career to do a lot of research and a lot of science and writing, and published a book, Haumea, Transforming the Health of Native Hawaiian Women and Empowering Wahine Wellbeing. And in that, what we were able to see is that there was already a widened gap in Hawaii when you disaggregate the layers of gender. And in this case, we're really talking about binary gender identities for most demographic data. When you unpack those layers, you really saw that Hawaii is not meeting up to this stereotype and this fantasy of we're the healthiest and happiest place to retire, and we have the best health care, and everybody is really thriving here. That's just not true for everyone. And so I think what we've seen now at this point, over a year into the pandemic, is there's a real women's global struggle for racial justice and gender justice that has to be a part of every single conversation. And I think for me, where I'll admit I tend to get really frustrated, is there's not yet enough systems-based solutions that are able to critically look at the gaps that we know have widened. So for example, these widening gaps in preterm birth, widening gaps in the over-incarceration of certain peoples, widening gaps in chronic and preventable health conditions that we know exactly how to treat and we know how to prevent from an upstream intervention. And we're not necessarily investing in those upstream interventions when we talk about issues like asthma and obesity and hypertension and type 2 diabetes. And so that's really a lot of my focus in my work now is let's talk about the food system and let's talk about food security if we're also going to be talking about obesity, hypertension, and type 2 diabetes, because I think a lot of us are too frustrated in having the same conversations over and over and over again without seeing substantive, lasting, accountable investments to these known and widened gaps.
Thank you so much. What you were talking about, the way that, this pandemic has really exacerbated these issues reminded me of something I was reading from the Brookings Institute earlier today. And it said that COVID-19 is hard on women because the US economy is hard on women. And this virus excels at taking existing tensions and ratcheting them up. And I can think of few issues in which this is clearer than domestic violence. So Nanci, I was hoping that you could share with us, what the pandemic has really done to the domestic violence issue here.
Thank you. We were terrified at the outset of the pandemic and the stay-at-home directives with the potential danger facing women, not always women, but for the purposes of our shared time, I'll refer to survivors as female and perpetrators as male, although we all know that men can be victims and survivors of partner abuse. The vast majority of reported instances and those coming for help are females. So for the sake of our conversation, I'll refer to the problem in those gender-based terms. But the danger faced by people who live with a partner who is abusive were extremely frightening for those of us who understand domestic violence and are devoted to helping our community help people be safe from domestic violence. The pandemic did not turn people into perpetrators of domestic violence. However, if you are living with a person who uses power over you or believes they have the permission to control you, the circumstances were a fertile ground for escalating harm and power and control. So when the phrases around safer at home started being repeated community-wide, we really felt it crucial to speak up that this was not the reality for many of our island sisters and their children. We saw repeated panel television programs and news stories and examination by elected leaders and appointed leaders and other community allies focused on food insecurity, unhoused communities, and public health, but nobody was talking about domestic violence. And we really felt it was essential to lift the veil on the incidents and did a pretty deliberate campaign to get our press to help us help people in the community know that we knew people were being harmed at home. I mentioned to several allies, colleagues, and family members that domestic violence, in fact, hasn't had this much attention since the O.J. Simpson trial, which those of you who are my age will remember. There was quite a lot of focus on the problem of domestic violence. Well, that was true this year, finally and ultimately, because there were so many people who were suffering the harm of abuse. Some recent research that I read showed that the families where, or the partnerships where there had been 2 episodes of physical violence increased to 15 in the course of 1 year, and where there was incidents of psychological harm, where there had been 16 reported incidents, that increased to 96. So you could see a pretty extreme escalation of acts that constitute domestic violence. So I could go on, but I want to allow for others to speak, and I would like to be responsive to your questions. I would like to just read a quick poem, if you would allow me. Yeah. It's what the people who have joined us this evening are doing. It's what the devoted staff at the Domestic Violence Action Center do every day. And it's what we implore the community, our community, to do when we speak about domestic violence. When someone deeply listens to you, when someone deeply listens to you, it is like holding out a dented cup that you've had since childhood, watching it fill up with cold, fresh water. When it balances on the top of the brim, you are understood. When it overflows and touches your skin, you are loved. When someone deeply listens to you, the room where you stay starts a new life. And the place where you wrote your first poem begins to glow in your mind's eye. It is as if gold has been discovered. When someone deeply listens to you, your bare feet are on the earth, and a beloved land that seemed distant is now at home within you.
Thank you very much. That was beautiful.
Yeah, thank you for allowing me.
I will definitely come back to this topic, but I wanted to go back to Denise. One of the things we have talked about and I wrote about earlier this year was how single mothers in particular have been affected by this pandemic. And I know that these economic challenges, particularly regarding caregiving, are exacerbated and when you don't have a partner. And so I was wondering if you could speak to that, Denise, and share, what it's been like for single mothers this year.
Well, thanks so much. I mean, I was thinking about that very question with some of the things that Kealoha was talking about, the challenges that women face. And, some of those are health challenges, but of course the caregiving is such an important role that women traditionally play, and especially single mothers, when some of the social safety nets that we usually have in place, right? The expectation that you can send your child to school and you can have that window of time where you can do professional things and other things, that is taken away. It really does put very, very stressing burdens on women, hard choices that they have to make about economic livelihoods and their children's education. But I think another side that Kealoha also brought up is the impact that COVID and disease really did have this past year too. I mean, many of us do have family members or loved ones that were impacted during this time, and the need to stop what we're doing and give care is a real one. I know that has existed in my family and others here on this webinar today, that is a real thing. And it does, traditionally, it has been women that carry that honor to care for loved ones. So I think the economic impacts, though, of that are challenging. It's an especially a challenging thing for single mothers who have that stress. And some of the ways that we saw that bear out this year was through basic food insecurity. I mean, the numbers skyrocketed of families saying, that they were hungry, very hungry, that they did not have food options. And the fear of even going out became quite difficult. How do you get the resources you need? the community stepped up in a major way. I was so honored to be a part of, the Hawaii food banks and the various efforts, but it was a difficult year for mothers to provide just, basic food and shelter and security, and how they balance work with their family needs were just very, very hard this past year.
I wanted to just see, Kealoha, you raised your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would just love to just keep going with where Denise was headed in her important sharings and the nodes and threads that you brought out, especially for me, occupying a privileged position of being a single mom, and what that means to have a career that I love because of an education pathway that I sought for myself in a discipline where I was already underrepresented, and just feeling the added burden and stress every single day of this immense, what we would call kuleana. The only way I would have survived, and the only way that I know that my sisters and cousins and neighbors are getting through, is because of this informal network of mutual aid and caregiving that has stepped up and has been the most consistent force for good and change that I've ever seen. And it's one that I will continue to tell generations to come of what this time really looked like. And so for me, it's just honoring people like my mom, who retired so that she can caregive for my grandmother at the same time as she can help caregive for my son while he's trying to do Zoom classes. And I'm here not trying to step out of the workforce and continue on this trajectory and career that I absolutely love. And thinking back and stepping back, that I'm just one person that you can put to these faces and these statistics, and how unfair it is that we even have to have this choice, and that it seems so unjust that women like me every single day are making these choices of what we can't fit in to every day or every week or every month, when we're making these concessions and you have to make these trade-offs because you can't do it all. And I think for me, the other point that I wanted to underscore in jumping into this idea of caregiving and support, especially for single parents, is the pandemic is not yet over. And if you look to communities like Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders, we are more deeply in it now than we were in 2020. And so I think my one, call and earnest, plead is, please do not remember that communities that you live in, that you frequent, that you and go buy, your vegetables and stuff from at farmers markets, we are still in this pandemic. And so we are not yet able to talk about this in the past. And if you can do one thing today, just check on your neighbors and check on your coworkers or check on your classmates, because if, I'm just one story to tell you, it's really hard and it's really defeating. And there are many days that can really feel deflating, like you're never doing anything right, when at the heart of it, we're doing everything at the best, rate that we can.
Thank you.
I want to follow up on, I want to follow up, Kealoha, on some of the things that you said, because it is a privilege that you have that network of your family around you that can give you that backup. Because what we see in the data and statistics about women who, you're put in a difficult position, you exit the labor force, or you take a pause because you need to be a caregiver, because for whatever reasons, there's various reasons that women might take a career break that tends to persist over time. It tends to be hard then to re-enter, to kind of get back into the labor force, and I think that's going to be true even as conditions lift. So women took a break when we were in a shutdown mode. When the shutdown mode lifted, that doesn't mean they go straight back to where they were. It becomes more persistent than that is what we're seeing in the data. And so I think if we just kind of leave, as policymakers, as a society, if we just leave people go as they will, it's persistently suppressing the opportunity for women to contribute and contribute to our vibrant economy, and also to earn their livelihoods. And it is that also for their families. I think it's a huge issue. So little things like having that network of your family around you so you can continue to work is a huge differentiator for you. But like you said, that is a place of privilege that we have.
I wanted to offer, thank you for those insights. I wanted to share just a teeny bit about what it's like to work in an agency that's trying to do two things. One is to support the people who work here, who are facing challenges described by Kealoha, while we are a survivor-centered program where we are trying to meet the escalating risks to people who are suffering the harm of the pandemic and abuse. We need our staff on board, but our staff have families and real lives and places they must be. Their children were needing to be homeschooled or learning from home. And so how do you balance what the community needs while maintaining a thriving organization that is able to adapt to the increasing demands that we were facing? To speak to the point about the pandemic is not over, and the realities that people continue to wrestle with, we see here a steady demand for help. Because as things slowly change or take a leap forward and then we suffer a setback, people make decisions at different paces. Their challenges look different. Their caregiving networks are different. Their escape routes are different. Their economics are different. So we are anticipating that the demand for help like we provide at the Domestic Violence Action Center will continue to remain at a pretty robust level. And we have to be prepared to meet those demands because of the unique nature of what we do. And we want to be here to help the community. But, this whole thing about trying to honor women who are working to serve the community and working to serve the community creates interesting challenges for an organization that I think, is really behind the screen. People aren't really aware of the role that the entire community safety net plays in the lives of women. And I think both Denise mentioned that and Kealoha. And as a community, my fantasy is that we will prioritize and invest in big ways in the safety net, which is where everybody goes when the community is under siege of any kind.
Thank you all so much. And feel free to interrupt me anytime, by the way, because I'm loving how much of a conversation this is sparking. Also, it is getting dark, so I might have to stand up and turn on the light at some point. So if I pop out of the screen, that's why. But actually, Nanci, what you were saying dovetails really well into my next question, because you were talking about, just the way as an organization that you manage, all the work that you're doing during the pandemic. I know for a lot of places, having to go remote has been a challenge, but for women or caregivers, that's often been a good thing to be able to have that flexibility to work from home. And so I was curious in terms of the work that you do, whether you've been able to, actually do any of that remotely, or whether you still have to be in person, and also whether there's any differences between last year and this year in terms of how your organization is functioning.
It's a very important questions. When you think about working remotely, and I think Denise alluded to this earlier, not everyone is working in a position where that's possible to work from home. And again, as a community, we have to recognize how it is that we as a community don't support those people who are unable to work remotely. For those survivors who we have worked with who are working remotely or who have lost their jobs, not everybody has internet. Not everybody has devices they could use. So again, one of the first things or early things that we did when we were trying to sort out what do the people we work with, what do they need? We started writing grants to provide our survivors and their children with laptops, cell phones, and tablets so that they could actually do either work from home if that was a possibility or participate in school by using the devices we made available. So the foundations and the community rose up to provide us financial support to make that possible. We added text and chat capacity to our communications vehicles because those people, again, who are forced to stay at home and are being hurt cannot make a telephone call. But how can they ask for help? How can they update their safety plan? How can they get what they need in terms of resources or decision making? So we shifted from just exclusively telephone to adding text and chat 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because domestic violence doesn't only happen during the work week or the work day. We also made hotel rooms available for those people who really needed to escape. There was a great deal of uncertainty about how would shelters respond. Staff at shelters weren't comfortable welcoming strangers, people that they didn't know. They were then at risk for getting infections and then taking it home. And people who are living at home and needing to escape, they don't necessarily want to go someplace where they don't know who's there either. So we tried to raise some money to make hotel rooms available for those people who needed quick escapes. We also had Uber donate 500 rides to us so that people could use transportation that would otherwise be unavailable to them. In terms of our direct services to the people we were supporting, nothing compares to being in person. But we did a lot of intakes on Zoom, support groups facilitated by Zoom, but the energy and the love that you feel and the support you feel from the people who truly resonate with your experience is kind of missing. I mean, even though I love you guys, I can't feel you. So it's kind of the way it is for a survivor who's seeking support with other people in the presence of other people who know what they've experienced. So that was a setback. And as soon as we could, we tried to go back to in person. We got, did all the physical distancing things. We were considered essential workers, and so all of our staff were vaccinated very early. We put up plexiglass everywhere in intake rooms and conference rooms, and really tried to be mindful of what it would be that would make people who needed us feel comfortable and people who work with us feel comfortable. So we expect to see continuing increase in the demand for help. The system, as has been amply illustrated, does not serve survivors well at all. Law enforcement was slow to get it right in terms of responding to domestic violence calls. In the early months, they were saying domestic violence was not going up when that was not our experience. And across the globe, that was not the experience reported by the UN and other countries across the globe. So we've got some work to do around gender justice and social justice and criminal justice, and the value and the growth, the community growth that results from this, I think, is so much is on display for us to see that needs to be addressed with honor, meaning, and intention. And those takeaways will catapult us in the direction we need to go, I think.
Thank you. I wanted to throw it back to Denise because we were talking about the ways in which work has changed over this pandemic, and I'm curious. There seems to be a big difference between 2020's pandemic.
Oh, absolutely. And I was thinking about that through what Nanci was saying, because there's so many threads here about work. I can think about it in my own workplace. I can think about it in, our classrooms. So I would say we went so rapidly into this shelter in place and work from home. But there were some silver linings in that, right? So what we're seeing in the data is when you look at women working, about half of women are saying they are working from home. And the numbers for men are at more like 35% are saying they're working from home, that's primarily what they're doing. So, it's been different across, that's another area where there's been gender differences. But we've gotten used to this idea of working from home. Here now at the University of Hawaii, same as with Nanci, we're trying to think about how do we return to in-person. And that was something that we wouldn't fathom not being in person just 2 years ago. Now this idea that we will be in person is something that our employees are questioning. Why do we need to do that? And even for us, our students are this past fall really strongly wanted to take their courses online. It was very interesting. So now how do we encourage, or do we encourage employees to come back to the in-person? Are we going to change the workplace and be a place where we're going to allow this kind of flexibility? That's a huge global discussion, not just a Hawaii discussion. There's a huge discussion happening, and what many of the CEOs, the executives, are saying they want to be back in the office. They would like to be back 3 days a week. They would like to be back 5 days a week, but that is not what employees are saying. And employees are looking for much more flexibility. They're asking, why can't we work remotely? When just not long ago, we would not have imagined that would be the standard way of working. So, I think remote work has many efficiencies. It also gives some opportunities to balance home life and work life in creative ways, and it's changed our wardrobes. It's changed many, many things. And so it has some silver linings. It has some good parts, but some of the parts that I think are missing is that, as Nanci was also saying, okay, how do you have those side conversations that help you really creatively solve problems? How do you get how do you tackle difficult issues? It's difficult. Are you going to schedule a 1-hour Zoom with somebody to do that? It's there's more of the informal parts of work that we used to and interactions in society that used to really be a normal part of our lives. And just a lot of changes there. So I think the future of work is, really up in the air right now. And it's going to be interesting to see what the next 2 years, 5 years holds. I don't know what you think, Kealoha. Does this resonate with you? Does that make sense? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. When we're talking about gender and COVID and lessons learned, we need to be talking, I think, right now about ways in which we're going to support girls and teens. 75% of youths 16 to 24 believe that the future is what they would call scary, right?
Yeah.
And that's our future workforce. They also highly believe in different styles of work production, like polywork is really common now. And it's something that two entire sets of generations have experience towards. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to have lessons learned and to think about labor and to think about industry in a much more future oriented way so that we can be much more ready to support our girls and our teens as they grow into young adulthood and they go on and they become the board chairs and they become the executive directors and they become the CEOs of corporations, and they're able to operate within an organizational culture and a style that I hope is much more inclusive and it reflects diverse leadership that we're really all yearning for so much right now.
I love that vision, but I think, a big challenge of the youth right now is, getting that first job in this kind of environment, especially coming straight out of high school. We're seeing a high level of youth unemployment in that exact age you're talking about, Kealoha, where how do they get their first job? How do they get that step in? I think again that's a big challenge for our communities, and we have to come up with some ways to help them with that first step. And it is going to be recognizing work is different than in the past. You make great points.
Thank you, guys. I was wondering too, Kealoha, whether you could talk about some of the solutions that you referred to earlier in this discussion. You were talking about the need for creative solutions to address these gender and racial inequities. Are there any, especially policy solutions or community solutions that you would point to that we should be considering right now?
Yeah, I would love to highlight one of each, a policy solution, and then also a community responsive organizational solution that we're working on at Aloha Care. And I think at the core of both of these solutions is realizing and confronting that there's this complex interaction of society and humanity with where we live, where we work, historical trauma, and the ways in which we just want equal and just access to being able to live well, and for our elders to live well, and for our descendants to have a strong future ahead of them. And so one that I'm always in supportive of is the Hawaii State Commission on the Status of Women's, Feminist Economic Recovery Plan for COVID-19 continues to be celebrated around the world and continues to be a part of high-level organizational publications and updates. Even just recently in September, a part of the UN General Assembly's just repertoire of references for people to be able to cite on ways that we can build back better. But in the ways in which we reference this, and part of the ways that I get to work with Auntie Nanci is we can build back better, and we don't also have to build across the backs of women and immigrants and refugees and people that continue to be labeled as vulnerable, right? In all of our ways that we want to define and identify who's vulnerable, there's also a brilliant amount of survivalship in strengths and assets that we can lean into. And so that's part of what we're doing at Aloha Care. And we're really lucky to have a woman of color leading our organization, who is an immigrant, who understands that complex interaction that I had described really well from that first person account, and is able to translate it into our work environment. And so we're really doubled down in our commitment to multi-year plans. And I know that oftentimes to the public that might seem boring, or it might seem not as exciting as other flashy initiatives. But for somebody who's been able to do this the entirety of my career, those good plans can have tremendous impact because it can set a course that you navigate as a team and you build collective action around. And so one of the things that we're really committed to at Aloha Care is we're building genuine partnerships with the community. COVID has taught us there is no blueprint. There is no manual on how we are going to operate in a healthcare and service delivery environment after this, right? We have the opportunity to build it uniquely for the people that we serve in this place that we call home, that founded and grounded our organization with the mission, vision, and values that we were bestowed to. And so we have articulated that in all of these important plans, and these are going to serve as our pathways, and those are going to serve as those stepping stones that we know that we're on the right course all the way through 2026, 2027. And I think that's really important for everyone to really think about right now. If you're strategic planning, if you're action planning, if you're a budget planning for the next fiscal year, your priorities and your policies are often articulated in those plans. Not all of us last at organizations from year to year or through crisis to crisis, but many times it's those plans that serve as a historical record and an archive for us to follow for whoever takes on that responsibility and that kuleana going forward. And so we're really proud at Aloha Care that we've really doubled down on our planning and organizational change efforts so we can meet the community where we're at, and to also be a good partner with the community, deeply listen, observe, and then invest in community-led solutions, not trying to reinvent the wheel, and build that manual and that playbook together of where we go.
Thank you so much. We're right at about 9 minutes until 6:30. So I just wanted to kind of do a little round robin and give everybody about 2 minutes to kind of summarize a key takeaway. And if you're not sure what to say, I think that question of like what solutions we should be looking toward could be a good prompt, but it could also be, what do you just hope people take away from this? And so Denise, do you want to start us off?
Well, I just really enjoyed this conversation today, and it was an honor, Kealoha, Nanci, Anita, to be with you. I guess some of the things that I take away from this is that there is a lot of work we need to do in our community, and we need partnerships and collaborations to make that happen. I would hope that a policy solution could include potential employers rethinking about how to reintegrate people back into the workforce in some creative ways. Maybe, we talk about internships for students. Is there something like a returnship for women who have been out of the workplace for a little bit? Is there a way that we can help support that first move for the high school graduates, or what are the skills that are needed to get back into the workforce? I feel like it's an important time to focus on reintegrating, reopening, and being flexible as we're doing it. So I close with that.
Thank you. Back to you, Kealoha.
I just definitely echo. I'm just so grateful to be in this space, especially right now, being intimately impacted in my own family by this devastating disease. I think I draw upon lessons of participatory conversations and idea making a lot. And I think about the ways in which our bodies and our genealogies right now, especially those of us that identify as Indigenous women, and yesterday being Indigenous Peoples Day, tell a collective history of population collapse, of language loss, of land degradation, entwined with gender impacts to our people, like my own as Kanaka Maoli. And that I think most solutions proposed during this pandemic have often left out those that are culturally appropriate and strategically placed in our ability to uplift and invest in Indigenous solutions by which our people have not only survived this pandemic, but scores before that have come to Hawaii shores and have been found throughout the Pacific in these genealogies held within our bodies. And so I really think that this is our moment to build a system that's capable of delivering gender equality while also centering Indigenous, immigrant, and women of color. And that's my hope in my work that I do every day. It's my hope in the ways in which COVID has impacted women in my own family and in my own circles. And it's my own hope for each one of you that is here today and has found some calling in your own collective responsibility to be a force for good while we're up against so much oppressive systems, and it might seem daunting and it might seem scary, that I fundamentally believe that together the future is certainly bright for all of us in the recovery that is possible.
Thank you. And Nanci, I wanted to see, would this be a good time to share my screen with the two slides that you
No, I think we missed that moment.
missed that moment? I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I should have prompted you, but I was kind of on
Okay.
a roll and I overlooked it.
Okay, but go for it. I just wanted the opportunity to sum up.
Yeah. Thank you both, Denise and Kealoha, for your insights and your wisdom on this. This has been quite a year, personally, professionally, community, globally. And of course, women, marginalized communities, Indigenous people, immigrants, took the greatest hits this year, suffered the greatest setbacks as they normally do. And the impact has generated a willingness like this that we're sharing this evening to begin a discourse which is different and which is inspired in new ways. And that's a great thing because that discourse lays the foundation for the change that we're all imagining. I think we've all shared what we see as missing, gaping holes, gaps, losses. And so all that we have seen on display creates an opportunity for us to continue our dialogue and center our discourse in the communities that have been impacted the most. I think we owe it to our community to do that. And so what does that translate for us at the Domestic Violence Action Center? It translates into us speaking up, continuing to speak up, challenging the status quo, which is not serving women who are suffering harm of abuse, marginalized communities, immigrant communities, Indigenous communities. We accept every invitation we're offered to speak. We want the community to know what we see. It's a big burden for us to carry, but it's an important burden to share, because once you see what we see, it will inspire the kind of change we're hoping for. We have changed our practice quite a bit. We're continuing to insist on reform that is imperative. And we're collaborating with others in ways that are exquisite and very fulfilling. So I'm grateful to have spent the hour with you, and we could probably get together again and do this more and more.
Thank you all. And I just wanted to invite back in Roger.
Yes, thank you very much. You know, the almost official theme of this festival is Hawaii 2.0 dash model for the planet, ? Which means what I meant it to mean. Yes, we are in some ways. No, we are not in others, but we could be. And this session was a lot about what we could be. And I'm very grateful to you for a really remarkable and thoughtful session. Thank you very much. This will, for attendees, this is going to be available on the YouTube channel on the Better Tomorrow Speaker Series, and then later again in a video, in an edited version of highlights on our website. It'll be up for a year. I think it's a very valuable session to have up for a year. So it'll be a beacon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you so much for everyone who's attending and our panelists. And thank you, Roger, for having me.